Okay, we're going to start Chapter 2, and in this first lesson of Chapter 2, we're going to look at how to solve some equations using a graphing calculator. And I'm hoping that the graphing calculator that I made available to you through Google Classroom worked okay for you. If it did not, there are a variety of options that you can find. If you just go to Google and search graphing calculator, there's a ton of online resources that you can use, and if you choose to do it that way, that's perfectly fine. If we were in the classroom, we would be holding a physical graphing calculator in our hand and doing it that way, but that's not the case. So, and actually I'm going to change up today's learning target. It says you will be able to solve equations using two different graphing methods. We're just going to look at one today. That way you don't have to stress out about learning all of that stuff on a graphing calculator. So, first, I just want you to take a look at the graphing calculator. If you've never used one before, there are a couple buttons that you need to be aware of. The first one is right here at the top. It's the y equals button. It's what allows you to graph. So if I hit the y equals button, it gives me a whole bunch of y equals. And we're going to put in different equations in that spot. We talked about this, we talked about this the last time. But this button here, the caret button, I think it's spelled K-E-R-E-T, caret. That's what allows you to type in a power, like x to the second power would be x caret 2. And then one last button, it's this one up here, it's the math button. The math button has different functions in it, so if I were to press the math button, it gives me different functions. If I arrow over once to number, this is where I want you to pay attention because the first option up there is 1, absolute value, or ABS. And we're going to use the absolute value in just a second. Alright, so let's start with an easy example. If I were to give you an equation like this and ask you to solve it for x, I'm hoping, since you're in a pre-calculus class, that you know how to solve this equation. You'd subtract x from both sides to get x on this side, and maybe in the same step you can subtract 3 and get x equals -4. Simple equation to solve. Now, what we're going to look at today is a method to solve this equation without having to use algebra, but using the graphing calculator. So I wouldn't expect you to do it this way for this problem, but I'm going to demonstrate on an easy problem so that when I show you a more complicated one, you'll be able to accomplish the goal. So, to use your graphing calculator to solve this equation, what we're going to do is take this side of the equation and graph it, and take this side of the equation and graph it in the same graph, and figure out where the two cross and where the two intersect. That will give us our solution, which we figured out already was -4. So to do that, you hit the y equals button, and in the first y1 equals, I'm going to put 2x plus 3. So I'm just going to punch in 2. The x key on the graphing calculator is right next to the green alpha button. It's got x, t, theta, and n, so 2x plus 3. That's my first equation. In the second equation, I'm going to put x minus 1. So to get to that second equation, I use the down arrow that's right here. And I'm going to punch in x minus 1. So I have two equations in my graphing calculator. Now I'm going to hit the graph button. It's in the upper right hand corner. I hit graph. It graphs the first side, then it graphs the second side. Notice the two lines that it graphs intersect. I need to figure out where they intersect. To figure that out, there's a sequence of buttons you hit. It is, first you hit the second button. That's this blue one. And you'll notice in the upper right hand corner it's got a little arrow. That means you hit the second button. Next you hit the trace button. That's this one right here. Second, trace. Now all that does is get us to this menu. And in this menu we're looking for an option that's going to help us figure out where those two lines intersect. And you'll notice that that's right down here. Oops. Right down here. The fifth option says intersect. So I'm going to hit the number 5. So it's second, trace, 5. Now at this point it's asking you questions like first curve, second curve, and so on. You can choose to put in answers to those, but for now I'm just going to say hit the enter button. That's at the bottom right. Enter, and then hit it again, and then hit it again. So it's second, trace, 5, and then enter 3 times. Enter, enter, enter. And what the calculator shows you is that those two lines intersect at x equals -4 and y equals -5. Well, we're only interested in the x coordinate of -4, and it gave us the right answer. So, if I hit clear on my calculator, and then the y equals button, I can clear out this equation, arrow down, clear out the second equation. Let's look at an example that's not so easy. So here is a big equation that you're being asked to solve. It's the absolute value of all this on the left-hand side and x to the third plus x minus 6 on the right-hand side. That's a little more complicated than the last problem. So we're going to use our new method to figure out what the solution to this equation is. And our new method is that we're going to take this half and graph it, and this half and graph it, figure out where they cross, and that will give us our solution. So you take the graphing calculator. Now it doesn't matter what order you put these equations in, so I'm going to choose to start with the easy one. It's this one. I'm going to put this equation into the first y1 equals. It says x to the third power plus x. So x button, caret key raised to the third power. Now before I hit in plus x, notice that my blinking cursor up here is still sitting in the exponent. I have to arrow over to the right to move it down. Plus x minus 6. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time just to make sure you saw all that. To do x to the third, it's the x button. Caret key right here raised to the third power. And again, you can see that little blinking cursor in the calculator is still sitting up in the exponent. I want to use the right arrow button to arrow over, and then it moves it back down. I hit plus x minus 6. Now if I hit graph, it graphs that side of my equation. But I have to figure out what the other side looks like. This one's the more complicated one. It has absolute value symbols. So I'm going to arrow down to the second equation, and I'm going to put in an absolute value symbol. The absolute value symbol is in the math menu, so I click on the math button. I arrow to the right to the numbers, and the first option says ABS, which is absolute value. So I press 1. There are my absolute value symbols. Inside of there now I'm going to put x squared minus 4x minus 3. X raised to the second power. Arrow over to the right once to get out of the exponent. Minus 4x minus 3. And now I graph it. Notice that the graph of the absolute value looks like this W. The other side looks sort of like what's called a saddle. And the two graphs intersect up here in the first quadrant. So to figure out the exact x coordinate, I do those keystrokes. Second, trace, look for the intersect, that's 5. and then enter, enter, enter. And what you see at the bottom is the intersection point includes an x value of 2.207 approximately. So my solution is 2.207. So if I were to put 2.207 back into both sides of this equation, both sides would be equal. In fact, it would be equal to this y coordinate over here, which is 6.95 something. Okay, let's look at one more and then we'll be done. So you have an equation that says x to the fifth plus x squared equals x to the third plus 5. Same set of directions. I'm going to take this left-hand side and graph it, and this right-hand side and graph it, figure out where the two intersect, and then that's my solution. So now if you have the graphing calculator and you notice the graphs are on there, there's a couple ways you can get rid of it. Easiest way is just to hit y equals, clear out the first equation, arrow down, clear out the second equation. So in the first spot, I'm going to put x to the fifth plus x squared. That's x raised to the fifth, arrow out of the exponent, plus x squared. Then I'm going to arrow down to the second equation, and I'm going to put in x raised to the third, arrow out of the exponent. Now, let me do that again. If you mess up and you go x to the third, and you forget to arrow over, what you end up with is plus 5 up in the exponent, which is going to be way different than what the equation is asking you to graph. So make sure that you're putting in x to the third, arrow over, plus 5. I hit graph. My first graph is this saddle. The second one is another saddle. The two cross. Figure out where they cross. You hit second. Notice the up arrow in the right hand corner. That means that I actually hit the second button. Trace. Look for the intersect. That's 5. Enter, enter, enter. And my intersection point is x equals 1.424. 1.424. Notice that I'm going out to the tenths, hundredths, thousandths place and rounding if necessary. So once you get the hang of it, using a graphing calculator is way easier than trying to solve this equation using algebra. Alright, I'm going to stop there. In the next lesson I will show you the other method used to find the solutions and using the graphing calculator.